I wonder if this podcast will get enough listeners that we could be sent free chairs.
See, I want to know if it's a one-off or like a lifetime supply, or if it can just be reupholstered.
Welcome to Neuroprovocateurs. Please give us chairs.
All we want
is chairs.
All we want is a specific special chair.
A lifetime supply, preferably.
Unless it can easily be reupholstered, and then we're great.
Oh my god.
This is
right,
the best.
I think that should be the intro to the episode.
That's the intro, hands
That's
down.
the intro. Hello, I am Jessica Stoya. I am a writer of things, usually about sex and pornography, because I spent 15 plus years working in pornography, having sex.
I like that we both feigned. This is our shocked face.
Who with a shocked face would like to introduce themselves next?
Hi, I'm Laurie Penny. I'm a screenwriter and an author and journalist, and I'm really excited to be part of the show.
I'm Pam Schaefer, and I am a musician and therapist, and I specialize in working with adults who are ADHD and autistic, and that brings us to this podcast right in front of you, this right here, this shenanigan that is occurring. Oh yeah, our topic today.
Yes.
We have a topic. Our topic today is ethics, pornography, AI. What even are ethics? What even is AI? What is pornography? Also,
is that really our topic?
Our topic is ethics in porn. Subtitle, what even are ethics? And we're pretty sure this is going to take us to AI at some point. And feminism.
Okay.
Heck yes. Also neurodiversity, because basically there are many, many, many people in this field who are not neurotypical. And it made me wonder at one point, I wonder why that is.
See, I feel like that just explains why there are so many people who are so interested in ethics within the adult industry. Because we look at it and we go, well, this is not quite right. And maybe it could be more right. But what is right? And then you end up on this, like, you know, only philosophers and
moral philosophers.
Moral philosophers, yes. And we have none of those. So it's gonna be a party today.
I'm very curious because Laurie, you had said you were just like, yes, I can go off on this. And Jess was like, I can go off on this. And I was like, I can go off on tangents. Today, I specialize in tangents. So I feel as though one of you should take this train and run with it.
Oh, no. Who's driving this train?
I will drive the train.
Thank God.
Licensed. I am very specifically not licensed to drive because I pass the written test with flying stars every time. And then we get into real world road conditions and I'm like, somebody a block ahead opened their car door. I must come to a screeching halt to avoid running them over.
And I feel like that's me just for life. Like in life, I pass the written test, ace it every single time, 100%. Real road conditions,
This is a good metaphor.
Yeah. Anyway.
So, ethics in porn. For several years, the hot buzzword to mean not mainstream misogynist stuff has been ethical porn. And I'm doing all these interviews for this book project. I have a co-writer, but I lead the interviews because it's sort of my known territory, my old haunt. So anyhow, I keep asking people who are described as ethical pornographers, like, you know, what they think ethical porn is. And the general tone of the room is people who are concerned with the ethics don't actually want to be called ethical, because they're like, no, the whole reason I'm concerned is because we're not there yet. Like, ethical feels like this, like, sort of goal that is being worked towards, but
So
actually,
is it like aspirationally ethical?
Aspirationally ethical, but no journalist is going to want two words that clumsy right next to each other. No.
Ethically non-monogamous.
I was going to say, it reminds me of the conversation around ethical non-monogamy, where it's like, well, of course it's ethical. And it's like, no, there's a lot of unethical non-monogamy that happens constantly. And so that's why there's that distinction. But then people are like, oh, well, what if we change it to like consensual non-monogamy? And I was like, well, then in situations, people then argue like, don't ask, don't tell. Can you consent to something like that? Because then someone doesn't have the knowledge that you would need to actually consent. So is that
informed
then
consent?
Ethical? Informed consent. But it would be also weird to say like, this is consensual pornography, because the implication otherwise is like horrifying. So I'm like, I don't know how we language these things.
Well, and unfortunately, there is non-consensual pornography, and I'm usually not a fear-based kind of person, but I doubt people listening to this are the ones who need to hear it. But if you're getting your porn not from a reputable source, if you're getting it from somewhere like a strange new tube site or a WhatsApp group, you don't know that IDs have been checked, and you don't know that consent was given in the form of legal paperwork. Now, is legal paperwork necessarily the most, real world conditions consensual thing? Questionable, but it is kind of the best we have as a society. Which leads me to my favorite complication in this whole thing is, even in the 70s and 80s, before women started taking positions of power behind the camera, before lesbian porn videos started being made in the Bay Area, like before anything that brought us to the idea of ethical porn, those sets, that community, they had an ethic. They had their own, everybody knew what it was. If you wanted to join the party, you had to participate by those ethics. Were they great ethics? Not necessarily. Were they ethics we were happy with? Obviously not, because people have taken steps to change them. But there was in fact an ethic, and that is my sloppy 10:40 p.m. info dump on the concept of and history of ethics throughout modern pornography.
Thank you. That's interesting, like defining ethical as this has an ethic, as in people have thought about it. It has internal logical consistency. I think what people really feel like the idea of ethical porn, or indeed ethical non-monogamy, means is this is always good and everybody's happy and this is fine. Like there's a kind of a literal virtue signaling, rather, as in there is something more virtuous than other kinds about this way of doing this particular sexual behavior. And because like sexual behavior and relationships are so deeply embedded, they're like at the heart of normative morality, then people who are in any way outside of that, it's always very interesting watching minorities, like minority communities who are explicitly exist outside that normative morality, watching them make it up from the ground up. And the difference is with ethical non-monogamy is that people cannot stop talking about it and inventing new words for it, and which is kind of adorable and sweet, where like you kind of want everybody to know what the internal ethics of your particular community are and all the little words you've invented, whereas it sounds like just what you're saying, that even back in the 70s there was a internal ethic for the porn industry. Presumably you're mainly talking about in the US, I don't know, but it was sort of unspoken. It was not for outsiders to know.
it frankly wasn't even spoken to insiders. You just kind of pick up what's considered right, what's considered wrong.
Well, and I'm curious about that because I think about the word ethics as ethos. So like the way that something operates or works, which is very different than morals, which is right or wrong, which then ties into obviously like I think of like the neurodiverse justice sensitivity. Like as people, we tend to be far more sensitive to what is quote right, like what feels right and just to everyone involved. But those aren't necessarily things that are tied to ethics. And so I'm really curious. I was just like, how did the ethos change over time, and like what now is considered, I was like on the road to ethical pornography, where I was just like, of course no system is ever complete, and then once it's complete then you build a new system. But I'm curious, like what are the things that have changed in the ethos?
So I just want to mark that I really casually conflated ethics with right and wrong. So thank you for catching that and reflecting it back oh so gently in a great and interesting response.
Studying ancient Greek came in handy
Yes.
for once in my life. Go on.
So, one example, and everybody take a deep breath and brace themselves because I'm going to say a word. It's a word that kind of upsets people sometimes, but I got to say it because it's literally what we called it. The box when I started performing in 2006. The box, it was usually a milk crate actually that, wet wipes, lubricant, condoms, all that was stored in for set was called the rape kit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Casual, chill, not at all anxiety and horror inducing whatsoever.
It would literally be like, all right, we're gonna move into the sex scene now. Hey, anyone know where the rape kit is? Like just like so casual.
Oh my gosh.
And that's because the set was a bunch of men standing around, all knowing each other for years and years, working together a lot. And then these women, largely young, who would cycle through the industry and not feel like they had the power to be like, what is wrong with you people?
That's one of those things where you're just like, are you hearing yourselves? You hearing yourselves talk? Is anybody? No, yeah, okay, that's sure a thing.
Yeah. So now it's called the set box because, and I think part of that is women who were rising to positions of power within production, directing, running production companies, also having their own small studios, their studio-like situations to produce for their OnlyFans or whatever. They were just sort of casually calling it the set box instead.
I can't imagine why.
Yeah. And also, the more that social media invaded everything, the more there was this pressure to be aware of the fact that, if a journalist from NBC is on set and hears us call the wet wipes and lube box by some term like that, that's going to look really bad.
Yep.
Right.
So that self-awareness kicked in when mainstream attention started to rise.
That's fascinating that it was like, because I think about, like the language systems that we all come up with. Like I think Amanda Montell has written a lot about this, like for Cultish and what's the other one, Word Slut, that she wrote about that we all in very small groups do develop our own inside language essentially. And even though it has meaning to us, like having someone come in from the outside, either they won't know what we're talking about or they'll assume we're talking about something horrifying by accident. Though that one is like legit kind of really, that's what you guys went with of all the things you could have went with.
All the things.
You went with that.
The sense of it kind of reminds me of the fact that the sense of moral surveillance that social media engenders the idea that anything could be collapsed out of its context, and anything you say, you sort of have to be on your guard, that, a lot of people are now sensitive to. There are all kinds of downstream effects. For example, like awareness of a sort of hovering woke internet presence that may or may not be there, is, like you're saying, maybe something that causes people to just gently rename that box without any big fuss being made of it.
Yeah, it's just the set box. No.
Oh my
Set
gosh.
box.
So simple, so much better.
Oh
The
my
snuggle
gosh.
kit.
The snuggle kit. The tidy up box.
The tidy up box. I personally, if I was on set preparing to do a sex scene and someone was like, "Oh, let me get the snuggle box," I would be like, "No, that's not." I agreed to one thing.
If you can name everything on the set the most cringe and fluffy thing possible, then it's hardcore. It must be hardcore. If people can stay serious and, ready to go through, like, oh, let's get the snuggle box out.
That was my favorite. My favorite caveat in a sex party invite, which for every sex party invite, there is, of course, the list of, guidelines, essentially. But one of my very favorites was someone said in their list, they were just like, feel free to observe as long as people are consenting to observe, but please keep casual conversation and joking to a minimum, as it is very hard to retain a boner of any sort when you are laughing.
That is not true. I have tested that theory over and over and over in my own bed. That is an outright lie, fake news.
That was exactly why I read it and was just like, haha, you have not met me.
You ready for the giggles?
Exactly. But I love that, like, they just stated that of, like, essentially, like, outside observers, go for it, but, like, please don't break scene for us. And I was just like, you amateurs.
Although I will say I am known to giggle during sex. And when I first started working in porn, because they, it was mainstream studio system, couples focused, but still very male gaze. And the male performers expected like a certain genre of affect. And I was giggling and laughing. Yeah.
Straight people, straight face. That was amazing.
After the first couple of scenes where there was a problem and we had to talk about it midway, I started warning the guys ahead of time, just being like, just so you know, I giggle. Think of it as like an audible smile because I'm having such a good time.
I love the fact that you not only had to content warning giggles, but explain what giggles are.
Oh, no.
Oh my gosh. And I think of how that crosses over with, in some ways, why it's almost easier as a performer. And I'm thinking of myself not in the sexual realm, but in general in the music realm, where there are certain things that connote certain expressions and it's very structured in a way that you can practice them. So you can convey, like, I am having a sad time. I am having a sexy time. I'm having and it might not actually be like what I would do during one of those scenarios, but it's almost like there's structure to it. And I think of that in like camming performance too, where there are there are almost like structures and beats that you can hit. And that is so appealing, at least for my brain. And like, I've talked to clients about this, and Jess, I'm curious if this was your experience, that it's almost like there's a predictability to it, that like, the rules of it. So it's almost easier to do certain things like that because there isn't the spontaneity of if you're interacting with someone emotionally or sexually outside of that. There's like a structure.
So this will surprise no one. I did not get the memo about the structure. And my director had literally instructed me to just be myself.
Oh, no.
Oh
And
boy.
every time I went back to him for clarification, like especially as the months and shoots went by, he consistently told me to just be myself. And it was the job of whoever I was performing with to have an internal clock and know when it's about time to move on to another position, put me in that position. Half the time I could pick up on, oh, this is my position now, and like just stay in that position. But the other half the time they had to kind of wrestle me lightly into it.
I just imagine like a cat wrangler that has like the little like the loop thing, like moving her limbs.
The toy. The red dot.
Except the toy is the penis and the testicles.
Oh my
The red dick.
I always knew where my light was. Right? I was good at that. I could
There we
find my
go.
light.
Oh
But
my
as
God.
far as like which way you need to angle for everyone to be able to do everything and have the camera still see it, no, nothing.
Nope.
And what ethical porn, what feminist porn, which later became ethical porn, did differently than the career I was having was they didn't care so much about open to the camera. They really wanted everyone to just be themselves in an unqualified manner that had nothing to do with the support of a performer who knew what they were doing, kind of wrangling the performance.
Well, and that's fascinating that was the switch to then feminist, which became ethical, which I feel like speaks to, as Lori perked up, I was just like, that speaks to Lori's specialties. And I'm just like, and Lori?
When did this naming convention change?
That's a good question. I have no idea what feminist porn called it, but I bet it was something else the whole time. And I began to notice the change in the early 20-teens,
Interesting.
like 12, 13.
We will do a research, and that research will go in the show notes because it's not in our brains right now. Or at least it's definitely not in my brain.
No, I would like to know that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been there's a long history of feminist campaigning against pornography in general, but particularly like live film pornography. And it's quite difficult to counteract the idea that to be feminist is to be against pornography in general, and in some ways to be against both any form of sex work and ambiently against heterosexuality sometimes. Like, that last bit is more of a stereotype that comes from, like, anti-feminism. Like, you're a feminist, therefore you hate men, therefore you hate sex. But sometimes there's almost a reactive position against that stereotype. And people are like, well, isn't it, I agree that it is perfectly all right for some people, including some people who might be attracted to feminist organizing, to be utterly fed up with both men and heterosexuality. That is a perfectly fine position for people to have. I know many people who have it, but the idea coming out of the 70s and the 80s that all pornography is all pornography involving women and femme people is necessarily non-consensual and also necessarily unethical. And those things are often conflated within censorious feminist discourse. But the idea is that this is unethical because it's non-consensual. That's what the argument comes down to. But I think if you unpack some of the emotion there, that's not just what it's about. Basically, it's hard, particularly at the moment. I think it's harder and harder to be involved in feminist organizing and be what is often called pro-sex. Kitty Stryker, I think, first described herself as sex critical. And my line when people asked me about my position on sex work, is that I'm not pro-sex work or anti-sex work. I'm sex critical and work negative. I think it's become, well, in the UK, it's been very difficult to talk about feminist organising in any way that is. UK feminism has just been hollowed out by transphobia. It's completely mental and very, very heartbreaking in lots of ways, because I've been involved in feminist activism starting in the UK since 2005 earlier, and it's really sad to see what it's come to. But the strain of feminism which has lent more and more in recent years towards transphobia, call it conservative feminism, that's also, generally speaking, the kind of feminism where the philosophy is male violence, and specifically male violence against women, and specifically sexual violence against women, is the structural root of misogyny and of all gender-based, on all sexism. Apart from anything else, I just think that's incorrect. I think that completely ignores the existence of economics and gender, both gender and sex, as economic functions. But the conservative feminism does essentially believe, this is boiling it down a lot, but there is a mood, a vibe, that the best way to be a feminist is to guard against male violence, including on an individual level, and to guard in some ways against heterosexuality on an individual level, against promiscuity, basically. The basic vibe is that the power that women have within a male-dominated culture is sexual power. The power to, and you can see this in a lot of modern alt-right and neo-lib philosophy, where it's took a lot of rubbish about evolutionary psychology and the female selection process is something that determines all of a man's future happiness. All of that. The power that women have is sexual power, and specifically the power to protect and guard their sexuality, give it away to the highest bidder. And that this is the greatest power, and really the only power that women are allowed within patriarchy. And so therefore, women who are promiscuous in any way or involve economics in any way in their sexuality are somehow scabbing. They're reducing the power of other women to bargain at a higher rate with their sexuality. I think this is conservative. Obviously, a lot of different kinds of feminists wouldn't say that. I don't think this is the majority feminist view. I think this is at the heart of some conservative feminist thought, some kind of intellectually ignorant conservative feminist thought. There are some very clever thinkers out there, even on that side of the movement, but essentially it is an anti-sex and anti-pleasure philosophy by design at the heart of conservatism, and often some religious feminism. But there has always been a modality of feminism which is not about that at all, which is about sexual liberation as part of gender liberation. And that is as old, if not older, than the morality police version of feminism, which tends to be the one that gets the most traction within culture for two reasons. The reason that we think about feminism as a moral police. One, because fundamentally that's the kind of feminism that is actually least threatening to capitalism and to patriarchy. You just it's part of the whole thing. You have somebody out there doing that policing, doing that moral shaming. It's part of the ecosystem. But also because that's the kind of feminism which is both it's most easily seen as the enemy. It's easily caricatured, and it's easily held up to a certain kind of man to say, this is your enemy. It's very useful to anti-feminists in that way. But, which is a short, very, very long way of saying, not all feminism is anti-sex or anti-sex work or anti-porn, but it is feeling harder and harder right now to express that. I don't know if that's just in the UK or if that's a wider thing.
It's from what I understand, that's part of the swing away from the term feminist pornography to, oh, I guess ethical pornography is what we'll call it, because these women who established the idea of feminist pornography were increasingly at odds with the most vocal end of feminism, the most, heavily platformed, as Laurie was describing. And oh, we lost a Laurie.
We lost a Lori. Yeah, I was just like, where did a Lori go? My phone is back now, says Lori. Excellent.
Okay. All
Okay.
right. Great.
Okay.
Great.
Hey, I'm saying, hey.
So I was saying, what was I saying? I was saying the linguistic
Like
shift.
the linguistic shift
Yeah.
from feminist to ethical, likely because of the associations with, like, I'm trying to think of how to say it. It's not necessarily like the demonization, but it's almost like it's creating a binary of something is feminist or not feminist, or something is like misogynistic or not. But also what struck me is like how odd it would be to take away someone's agency of self-expression based on what you believe their internal set of ethics or morals might be, as opposed to allowing someone else to determine that. Like to be like, well, you just don't realize that you're being exploited. You just don't realize all of this. And I'm like, well, on one hand, you can point out information to someone, but ultimately, isn't it up to the person to determine what their feelings are about exploitation in that context?
Yes.
What did I miss?
You missed
What did I miss?
some stuff.
So I posited that, like, even though there are in some ways objective systems of exploitation, if you are saying to someone that they are being exploited in a way that they do not feel they are being exploited, who are you to determine if they are in fact being exploited? And is that taking away someone's agency if you're saying, well, if you do this, it must be because of these reasons, and you are just, you poor child, you have been taken in by this. And it's like, if it's a full grown person and you present this information and they're like, I still would like to make this decision, like that.
So I personally, when I was directing and producing, it was during that shift from calling it feminist to calling it ethical. And I was so much more comfortable with the ethical term in a getting out of the boiling water into like an ice bath, right? Like neither's good, but it was a relief after the boiling water. And for me, a lot of it came from one, I don't want to step on the toes of the feminists. Like they seem like they've got their own thing going on. And the really loud ones, they don't seem like they have time and space for me. So like, let me just not use this word and let them do their own thing. Partially a belief that in order for something to be called feminist, there should be like actual feminism in it. Otherwise, it's just like a woman earning a living. Great. I personally, I don't feel like that should be the bar for feminism at this point in time. I think it should be a little higher. Like in the United States, we got the ability to have our own checking account in like 1970 something. So like we should be a little further along.
A whole generation.
Yep. Yeah. The bar, it was on the ground. Now it's like hovering above the ground.
Just above the ground. It was no longer rebar.
Partially a desire just to not get yelled at more. So my best friend, then once ethics had entered my brain in like direct relation, something I felt like, immediately connected to now, what is ethics? It took him 6 years. Bless him for putting in the work for 6 years. But he finally managed to lead me to the understanding that everybody's got their own ethics. And sometimes we have communities that share ethics, but most of the world is walking around thinking that their own individual stack of ethics is like the ethics, the only ethics, the Highlander of ethics. And I was like, when he finally got it through my head, I literally fell on the kitchen floor. I collapsed from the enormity of like understanding this massive thing finally.
Yeah.
also when people say feminist porn, now I am kind of expecting some active feminist content, like somebody should be getting spanked with a copy of The Second Sex, or possibly not that because it's really big. Possibly, actually getting spanked with the Origin of Private Property and the Nature of the Family, but because I
See,
love Handel so much.
Pam's laughing like it's funny, but I'm like, actually, I feel like I don't think this has been done and it should be done.
I do know that there's like I did have a friend who does pro dom work get requested to be beaten up with a copy of a feminist book, and my friend asked if she could use one of mine, and I'm like, that's just the best thing I've ever been asked. Yes, obviously, but I don't know if this was ever recorded for posterity.
That's like the most obscure, deep compliment maybe ever. Like,
it's wonderful.
This is your stamp of legitimacy.
If anyone ever wants me to direct a spicy film again, I just want to float out there that, like, given Laurie's permission, I would want to just build that out. Right?
I also want to know who's going to be the porn versions of various famous feminist philosophers. Like, who's going to be porn Judith Butler?
I literally was just thinking that. Oh my God, the performance of gender just took on so many new meanings.
So many new meanings.
But also,
See,
like,
you just know that Judith Butler would be fascinated by this.
What is Pornopticon going to be wearing?
Yes! Yes!
Because you can't do a feminist porn without involving Paglia. Camille Paglia is very contestable, but from the perspective of a sex worker, logical argument.
This is the niche content that you're here for, you amorphous audience that is giving us chairs.
The chair company is like, look, I was willing to do this until Soya brought up Paglia. And
until you invoked Paglia, then it was all over. Oh my God. And when you said, like, who's going to play these people, like, what came to mind was, like, you know, how you said, oh, we might eventually end up at AI. And that's where my brain went, is that I was like, oh, it could be AI representations of these people. But then I think about, what is agency over your own body in regards to AI, and especially in regards to something like this, where it's like a performance.
Dworkin.
Oh.
Me positing a question followed by shriek laughing.
Oh. I'm so fond of Andrea Dworkin, even though she's wrong about pornography. I'm so fond of her prose, and I think she's the way she's, sorry to take on a serious tangent, but I get defensive of Andrea Dworkin because she was, like, unlike so many of the other rad femmes, she was very much not transphobic, and her views on both sex work and on pornography specifically came out of a specific, her own ethic on, which was not necessarily philosophically related to a lot of the moral positioning, the sort of mainstream moral positioning. She's also just a beautiful prose writer, and honest, a fantastic writer of prose. And I think if she weren't used as this, like, monster figure, mainly by men, honestly, and anti-feminists, like the dungarees, like the fact that she was, I think, enormous, big hair, just a big personality. Like, if she weren't seen as this sort of boogeyman, people would actually read her. Like, her memoir is called Heartbreak. It's stunning. Like, it's just as, and she's got this really punk edge, honestly. But yeah, I also I feel like that's the one. I'm like, oh, she hated it so much, and I'm so fond of her. Maybe there shouldn't be porn Dworkin.
Well, there shouldn't be Dworkin, because we can look at Dworkin's writings and testimonies before the Mies Commission and all that kind of stuff, and in no uncertain terms, there is no point across her entire public life that she even hinted she would be okay being involved in anything that depicted sex whatsoever. I honestly, I feel like she might be not necessarily spinning, but wobbling in her grave over being in this conversation at all. And, so that would be a case where, even though it's parody, and even though the person is no longer among the living, correct?
Yes,
yeah.
She passed in 2005.
Then it still would be completely unjust from my perspective and out of alignment with the ethics of informed, time to think through it consent that my pornography was always made with.
Yes. I love how you articulated that, and I want to understand more about what that informed consent was and how that speaks to both like ethics, but also the crossover with like you said, it would be unjust, which like that to me is like ultimately that's what I'm always on like the quest for. Like I'm always like eternally optimistic that people can basically like learn and do better, even if someone messes something up or has an opinion that I'm kind of like, where were you going with that it can always change, but it's always like I have a bend towards what I would describe as justice. Like doing right by someone is how I would define that. So I'm curious, like, what did that look like?
So I'm going to start with, we did not always hit every single item on the list, but the ideal process is step one. Hey, I want to do this thing to the prospective performer. And if it's something that's in a series, would you like to see the previous volumes of this? If not, here's the best description I can give of what I'm trying to do. Okay, great. Is there someone you would like to work with? Give me 3 names. And then go to the other performer. Hey, I'd like to do this, repeat the whole process, and say the other performer we're using is so-and-so. What do you think? Okay, great. What's your rate? Right? So it's the first major thing is not what's your rate to show up on set. It's I want to do this specific thing. How much do you want to be paid for that? Then legal paperwork, because we all know legal paperwork it's got a lot of words we aren't really used to dealing with, and
unless that's what you get off on.
It's dense, yeah. It's not a thing that most people in the adult entertainment industry like want to read 5 minutes in 5 minutes before they're expected to do a sex scene.
I was curious because so many people brought it up that I was just like, okay, I will sometimes read or witness things simply so that even if it's not something that I enjoy, that I want to understand a little bit of, though I've got to say, sometimes when I do things like reading 50 Shades of Grey, it was genuinely hard to put myself in the position of someone that was reading this and being like, yeah.
To be clear, I'm not saying that I only read 50 Shades of Grey for research, because I would never read pornography. I read vast quantities of pornography. I'm just going to put that out there. Like, I'm not really a visual person, so like, I find it hard to connect or like get turned on by anything, like any video stuff, but I read stacks of dirty books.
I love that you've got like the hand out.
So high. About so high.
Over 5 feet of pornography.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just but that one I did actually read mainly for research, and my main takeaway was, this is just not hot. Read something else that's better.
I read all 4 on a particularly lengthy airplane trip. And to me, the series as a whole was about the contract, what's her name's magic hoo-ha that changed and healed the damaged bad boy,
Yes.
and also expensive clothing, like sort of, conspicuous consumption, consumer capitalism. And then after so much literal fetishization of these luxury objects and brand names,
Oh yeah.
there's a typo on like the second to last page. Louboutin is misspelled. And I was like, no!
Incorrect table setting.
Oh no.
I had a good time with the luxury brands, and that
Just read Crazy Rich Asians if you want, like, just full on luxury brand porn. I literally, after I finished that book, I generally spent like a couple of hours convinced that I needed an Hermes bag. And like both of you, Pam particularly has like seen the amount of goblin I am. Can you imagine what would I even do with something like that?
You would
I
fit
would
an
keep random bits of
inordinate
gum in it.
Yes, I was like, you would fit so many mysteries in that bag is what you would do. No one would know what was in it, including and especially you.
Absolutely.
But Lori, think about what you were saying about like it's not hot. Like I feel like sometimes when we invoke like ethics and consent, people somehow assume that it's not hot, when for me it's like the opposite. Like it's almost like once I know the scaffolding of something, it becomes a lot hotter to me because then I know like kind of what are the bounds in which we're playing. And then I actually feel like way more free to be more playful and open in myself. Whereas if I don't know those bounds, I am kind of on the lookout for them. Like I'm on the lookout for the electric fence, as it were.
So in the late 2000s, 2010s times and before, performers would have what we called the talk with each other, and no one told us to do the talk. And just, if there was a new performer, the not new performer would approach them and begin the talk. And it was just a very brief, got any boundaries, limits, great. Anything you really like, all right, good to know. Took maybe 4 or 5 minutes, if that. And now ethical porn sets often have intimacy coordinators who are there through the booking process even, and, on set. And I believe they often do a check-in afterwards as well.
Yeah, several of my friends have actually gotten into that field. Like kind of, it's like adjacent to like sex coaching, but it's like on set doing that, not just on, like I know some people who do it on like mainstream film sets and then others who do it on like porn sets. But it's really just like having a facilitator there also helps people feel more comfortable asserting themselves because they also know that they're not going to quote like get in trouble or things like that, and that there's someone that's looking out for everyone's best interest and safety. And that yet again, like for me at least, that just puts me at ease, like hearing that there is someone that's looking out for that, as opposed to the opposite where someone might feel coerced to go past their boundaries if they feel like they have to in order to like keep a job or things like that. And so having someone that's like, oh no, like I'm actually here as the safeguard for that, I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like I really like that.
It's I was just thinking, I just really want to know who the intimacy coordinator on Industry is. And if neither of you have seen this show, you really must. Apart from anything else, it fucks extremely, as they say.
That was the funniest thing that, for context, I've only met this human being once over a friend's birthday dinner. And he referred to me in casual conversation as someone who clearly fucks extremely. Yeah. And I was like, I mean, I'm so flattered, but also I was racking my brain. I'm like, what did I say over dinner? What did I do at that birthday dinner? Can I replicate it? Like, I want to know how to like channel whatever that was. Cause I was like, this person has met me like once. We're in like a casual group chat together where like they've vaguely interacted with me. And I'm like, what did I do to give this impression? Because it's not that it's wrong. I just am curious.
So,
It's a
Laurie, to give you a half answer to your question, it's most likely that industry has several different intimacy coordinators to avoid the conflict of interest of the intimacy coordinator working with a director over and over and over again and building a stronger
ah
loyalty to them.
to the director rather than the
Oh,
performance. That's fantastic.
Yes, I steamrolled with a good one.
that was
That's really cool.
good. That speaks to both the morals and ethics of doing that, which I was like, we have the structure and the is it right or wrong.
Yeah, having more loyalty to the actors and performers than to the person technically in charge of the set. That makes sense and is beautiful.
I love that. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Neuroprovocateurs. Please join us on Substack, where you can find exclusive clips, resources, and community of the neurospicy variety. We are an independent podcast, so know that your support on Substack and beyond means the world to us, quite literally. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to leave us 5 stars and glowing reviews and follow our podcast on your preferred podcast platform so that you can be sure to get each episode the moment it drops, and know that your reviews help us get in front of other people who might also want to listen to this podcast. We are on social media in all of the usual places as Neuroprovocateurs. Thank you again, and excited to see you for our next episode.